Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I'm your host, Mark Roberti, the content marketing expert, bringing you 5 new episodes every week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. One of the things you hear a lot about in real estate is location, location, location. And in any location, there are deals that can really make a big difference on your income if you're able to swoop in on them at the right time. So that's why we're going to focus on how you can find the best real estate deals in any market. Today's guest is a real estate investor, world traveler, and student of business, money, and life. His mission is to provide people with practical and approachable education and empowerment. He helps people win financially so they can do what matters in their lives. Since 2003, he's co-owned a business investing in real estate where he has bought, sold, financed, and rented hundreds of properties. Today's guest for episode 179 of the Breakthrough Success Podcast is none other than Chad Carson. Chad, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, it's awesome to be here, Mark. It's an honor. Thanks for having me. I can't wait.
Chad, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. And real estate is like a lot of people preach. It's like a lot of millionaires do it. Like a lot of the wealthiest people, they invest in themselves. They invest in real estate. And I do want to get into finding the right deals because that is obviously like how you get into real estate and become successful. A lot of it is finding those deals. But Before we get started, I'm wondering if you could share with us how your real estate journey began. Like, why real estate?
Yeah, so it wasn't actually something I planned on doing. I went to college and I was a biology major and studied German. I kind of had some other interests, and I had some family members who had rental properties. And so it's like when I graduated from college, I was like, I don't really want to go into some of the traditional paths. And so I thought I'll just kind of start playing around with this. You know, if I do some real estate here and there, it'll serve me long run. I always have to own a house, and maybe I'll have a rental property or two. And so I kind of got into it with that mindset, and I kind of got attached to it. It was being an entrepreneur, first of all, not having to go to a job, not having to, have that kind of flexibility and freedom was pretty awesome. But then I saw that real estate's a pretty cool avenue because when I got into it, I didn't have a lot of money. I was just getting out of college. Luckily, I didn't have any debt because I got a football scholarship in college. So I had that kind of going for me. But basically, I didn't have enough money to be like a traditional real estate investor where you go and buy a property, make a down payment, do that sort of thing. So I was more in the buy and sell business when I first started. And so I went around and just found deals for other investors who did have money. So they actually, in the part of the country where I was investing in Georgia, they called that a bird dog, which is kind of like a hunting dog who would go and kind of sniff out deals or birds for another person. And so I would go find deals for other people, and then I make a small fee whenever I found it for them. And so that was kind of a good way to get started because I learned, like the topic you're talking about today, how you find deals. I really had to kind of jump in the deep end of the pool and really learn how to do that one specific part of the real estate business. And then later on, as I started growing, I started doing business with my business partner, who I'm still in business with. We started buying and flipping properties, like fixing them up, turning them around, flipping them, kind of like people see on HGTV and some of those shows. But then we also eventually, after we saved up some more money and some more reserves, started buying income property, which is kind of more my focus today because it's a nice transition because it's still a business a little bit where you have to manage your properties or manage a manager, but it's much more passive and there's much more regular income coming in every month. And that's allowed me to do a lot of cool stuff with my family. I have 2 young kids and my wife. And we've traveled we just this week actually got back from Ecuador where we lived for 17 months and we're able to kind of hang out there. And my kids went to school there and learned to speak Spanish. And so there's a lot of other stuff, which is my big deal, is real estate or a business or entrepreneurship, whatever it is for you, is a tool that financially can kind of take away the need to have to sell out or go to a job or do things that you don't like just to make money. And so real estate for me is that. It's just a really solid, conservative tool that you can use to produce regular income and then do a lot of other cool stuff that you want to do in your life.
And you mentioned that real estate, there's some work to it, and with the income properties, there's a little less work to it than like flipping a house, because like flipping a house, you gotta, in many cases, make improvements to the house before you flip it. But
Right.
what is the like some of the work that you have to do other than searching for deals and making those happen?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. Like a lot of the work is the finding the deal and getting it financed and kind of the upfront stuff. But as an ongoing thing, just to give you an example, like every week, even when I was out of the country in Ecuador, about an hour or two per week, I would do just like some bookkeeping, just like checking. Like we have 90 units, so it's a lot more than if you had 5 or 6 units, it'd be a lot less work than this. But I have people back at home who collect the rent and deposit and make sure. So I'd make sure that's deposited. I would have a few bills that I need to pay. Like there might be a plumber who had to go fix something, and I would just pay that through online bill pay through my bank, and just do a few little kind of just checking on the books. The cool thing about real estate and a lot of other financial businesses is you can tell the health of your business just by checking the numbers. And so I would start with that every week, just looking at my bookkeeping, making sure everything's okay in the bank account, and then ask a few questions, send a few texts, talk to the property managers, and that's pretty much it. I mean, once you get it rolling, if you have the key is that other people doing a lot of that stuff. Like in real estate, you could be the person who fixes a toilet, who paints your walls, who collects the rent, who does all that. And if that's what you want to do and you want to be in the property management landlording business, that's cool. You can make a little bit of side money doing that, especially at first. But eventually, the path that I recommend and where I've been is that you are treating it like a business. You outsource everything, you pay other people to do it, and you're sort of an asset manager who has to check in on things here and there. And every once in a while, you need to make strategic decisions. Like we're deciding to sell a couple properties this year just because it's the right time to do it. Maybe buy another property. So there's those kinds of things you spend your time on, but it's more kind of higher level things than it is, getting you don't have to be in there digging dishes or changing toilets or doing that kind of stuff if you don't really want to.
Now, I know that this episode is focused on finding the best deals, and we are going to go into that. I just want to ask one more question about the work that you do. I mean, I really like the idea that when you're first starting, do all the work, do the property management, just everything, because if you learn the skill, it's easier to coach others on that skill. But right. You've hit that eventually point, and you now have property managers. So how do you go about finding property managers who you can trust?
Yeah, the trust part's the key part. And for me, like there's two parts of trusting. It's probably anybody, but property managers specifically in this scenario. One thing is are they an honest person? And how do you tell that about somebody? Everybody listening to this probably has experiences with dishonest people and honest people. It's sort of a gut feeling, a sort of meeting the person. With real estate in particular, it's kind of a local business. So I know a lot of people, and I actually coach people who live in California and invest in Alabama, for example, across the country, and that's okay. But you still probably want to go there and meet the people. There's just something about face to face, worst case Skype or something, so you can see them. But you want to meet them, kind of get, what kind of person are they? What kind of vibe do they give you? What kind of vibe do the people in their office give you? That'd be like a first level filter, I think. If you talk to 3 or 4 property managers, make sure see who you get a good vibe from. And then 2, though, is the competence. You want to trust somebody to be honest, but then also, like, can they actually do the job? And they might be an awesome person, honest, really honest, but then they just suck at their job. They just can't do it. And so you want, that's the kind of thing where going back to what you said, if you've done the business yourself a little bit, if you've done some of the property management, you'll then be able to ask them questions and say, like, what are your systems? Like, how do you, when you're leasing a property, what do you do? Like, what are the steps you take? Or when somebody doesn't pay their rent, what's the process? And if they look at you like a deer in headlights and say, what process? What do you mean by that? That's the wrong person, because in any business, you've got to have processes and systems. You got to have operations manuals. And so that's where you would kind of test them and see what they have, what their systems are like, who their employees are. And that's an upfront. That's kind of another one of those upfront works, pieces of work you're going to do, but it pays off long run, because if you find a person you trust and you find somebody that's competent, then you can be much more hands off, and you can just manage that person, and they'll have a team of people who can help fix your properties, collect the rent. It'll give you reports every month, and it just makes your life a lot easier.
Now, I think it's really good that we talked a little bit about the work, because it's not like as passive as like other investments where you make it, you just sit by, you forget about it. In the beginning, it can be hands-on. You can get to the point where it is passive, like Chad has it right now. But I just wanted to paint that picture for everyone. And sure. Yeah, like the thing about real estate, like I was born in a time where like I don't know a world without the internet. And right. I know real estate's been very different because of the internet. Like you have Zillow and other sites where you can very easily find properties that are up for sale. But with all the additional information we have available to us, like I feel like we have no problem with finding properties for sale because of all these online websites. But how do we find great deals and actually identify those great deals?
Yeah, I love thinking kind of outside the box. And I think how you find deals in real estate changes from year to year. And one of the things you just mentioned about the technology is awesome. I mean, you can go on Zillow, you can go on realtor.com, you can find tons of information, and it's a much more transparent industry, which is good. I mean, the big picture, internet is like changing everything, right? But when you're finding deals, and think about this as like you're a small fish. Like you and I are like, compared to like big hedge funds and big, huge, conglomerates who buy properties, like all we're trying to do is like buy, at least this is me and my business, is we're trying to be this little small fish in a small little section of a neighborhood or a small section of a city and find a couple of good deals. We're not having to buy a bunch of volume. And so sometimes the answer is to go against the current. Like if everybody else is using technology and everybody else is using computers and they're using fancy kind of algorithms, sometimes the answer is like to go completely like non-tech. And so like the way I find some of my best deals is actually like getting out in a neighborhood. And this is what you could, if you happen to be local, you can do this. It's something we call like driving for dollars or walking for dollars. And so like, let's say you have a dog and you're just going to go walk your dog, and like pick a neighborhood strategically, look on Google Maps, like kind of identify the areas that you think are have good fundamentals. And if you want to, in the show notes, I have a free blog article that goes to like the steps of identifying a good region and a good neighborhood and like what are the best neighborhoods to invest in. So just people can kind of get some of those fundamentals. But once you get those, then you start zooming in, and if you could actually get out in the neighborhood, walk around like on a Saturday morning or on the weekend sometime, and what you'll find is if you walk around for like an hour or two, you'll start finding little clues. It's almost like a detective game. You'll find a house that has grass a little bit higher than others, and you can kind of see from the windows there's no curtains, and it doesn't look like anybody's living there. There's newspapers in the still on, or if there are newspapers, a lot of people don't have newspapers anymore. There might be like, mail and stuff in the mailbox sticking out of the mailbox, or you can just you can tell that a house is vacant. And so what do you do with that? Well, nobody else really knows about that. There's no like computer program that's saying, here's a vacant house. And you can make a note of that. You can go online to the tax assessor, or perhaps Zillow, but the tax assessor for your local county is like the best place to go find information about a property. And so you'd make a list of like the 5 or 6 properties that you saw that were vacant that day. And the tax assessor tells you the name of the owner, the contact information, the mailing address, which is sometimes different than the property itself. And you just drop them a note in the mail. You might just say like, hey, my name is Chad. I happen to be walking in the neighborhood, and I'm looking for a house in this neighborhood. And I noticed that your house at 123 Smith Street. If you're interested in selling it, I'd love to talk to you. I'm a buyer. Please give me a call. Here's my phone number. Here's my email, and that's it. And so that's like a very inefficient but super effective way to like just go directly to the source. And it's something that the other thing I like about that is if somebody's interested in kind of dabbling in real estate and just kind of figuring it out, you can do that like this weekend. You can just say, all right, I'm going to get a list of neighborhoods. I'm going to go out. I'm going to drive a little bit, walk a little bit, and you can It's something I've never stopped doing for the last 16 years, and it's always been an effective kind of way to go to the source of deals.
That is an interesting approach. I mean, especially with like the technology making it so much easier. I mean, I see it taking a lot more time, but being able to reach out to people. Just a quick question, like, do you reach out to those people before they post the house for sale, or is it like a mixed bag? Like sometimes they've posted it on sale already.
Exactly. Yeah, it's both. But yeah, and I didn't give a precursor to all that. Like the issue with technology, like is awesome as it is for like finding stuff really quickly, is that you have a lot more competition. Like everybody else is also going to be looking on Zillow. Everybody else is also going to be looking on a lot of the online sites. And I have definitely bought properties off the MLS and off like multiple listing services where people put them online. But the issue is like because there's probably 20 people looking at the same property you're looking at, you have to bid really quickly. You're gonna have to jump on it really fast. You got to have your ducks in a row, and it's less likely that you're going to get a price at a discount that's going to make it easier to buy that property and make money on it. And so the reason I said like kind of go against the grain a little bit, find what everybody else is doing, and just do something opposite is because you're going to have less competition. And so these properties that I'm talking about, the vacant house typically has no sign in front of it. It's just you're basically cold calling or cold sending a letter that owner. And if you send 10 letters, maybe 2 or 3 of them are interested in talking to you. And out of those 2 or 3 interested in talking, maybe one of them is a promising property. And you're the only one making an offer on that. There's nobody else talking to them at all.
Yeah, and I can see that leverage helping out a lot, and especially some people may just want to get rid of their houses quickly. So I do see the power in that, but I feel like no matter how often people listen to real estate advice, like listening to this podcast, reading real estate books, or just real estate advice in general, there's a difference between taking in the advice and actually doing it. And I feel like no matter how good your system is, like some people, they just may not feel too confident about it in the beginning, because for some real estate investments, you're easily asking for thousands of dollars or a lot more than that in some cases just for one property. So how can we confidently invest in real estate properties?
Sure. Yeah. So when you're going out looking at properties, I think there's 2 main criteria that you're looking at. One is very financial and kind of numbers driven. And one is very qualitative and it's more about almost like the feeling that people are going to have in a neighborhood. And so let me talk about both of those. The numbers, are basically, I'd say there's 4 or 5 different key criteria I look at, but the number one that drives everything is the ratio of how much that property will rent for compared to what you can pay for it or what the price of the property is. And there's different terms for that. And there's different ways to dig into it. But for one example might be there's something called a gross rent multiple. That's the simplest way to look at it. So to explain that, one way is that let's just say there's a house that is for sale, and you look online, look at Zillow, you talk to some other investors, and you learn that property could rent for $1,000 per month. And so that's $12,000 per year. And then that property was for sale for $100,000. And so there's a ratio of those 2 numbers. And I don't have a calculator in front of me right now, but like 100,000 divided by 12, whatever that number is, you have a ratio, and you would compare that to other properties and say, all right, this property over here, they're asking $150,000, and the ratio of the rent to the value is obviously worse on that one because I'm having to pay more for the same amount of rent. And so that's kind of a starting point. That's not the end all be all, because you still have expenses when you rent a property. So you have property management, taxes, insurance, maintenance. There's a list of things that you will need that come out of your gross rent before you can actually make a profit. And so there's other ways to analyze the numbers. Like one of my favorite ways is something called a cap rate or a capitalization rate. And the best way to explain that's kind of like the dividend on a stock. If you're going to buy a stock, is the actual income that you get from that property, and that after you've paid all of your expenses, not including your mortgage. So it's just assuming you went out and bought a property and we're going to pay cash for it, which most people don't. Most people get a mortgage. But what you're wanting to see is like, all right, what would I actually have available to pay both my mortgage company and me, and it turns into a percentage. So it's like you're going to buy a bond or a CD or something. There's usually like, hey, you can get a CD at 2% at a 2% interest rate. Well, you might look at a property and say, well, this property produces a 7% cap rate. And you would say, does that meet my goals, or does that not meet my goals? And if you were looking for an 8% cap rate or a 10% cap rate, you would either have to offer less to get that cap rate to be a better number for you, or you would have to just go to another deal. So that's the numbers side of it. We can talk a lot about that because that's really important. But the other thing that one of the biggest mistakes I made early in my career was I was all about the numbers. I was just focusing on, all right, let me get the best cap rate I can get, the most rental income I can get the best price I can get. But then I didn't look at the qualitative, like the things that are harder to quantify, but they're super important in real estate, because these are things like when you drive into a neighborhood, how safe is it to get out of your car? Is this a place where you're going to be a little bit nervous walking around at night? The numbers might be awesome, but if it's kind of a rough neighborhood and it's not that safe, you're not going to attract tenants who are going to want to stay long term. Or if it doesn't have to, there's on the opposite end, you want neighborhoods that have really cool stuff around them. So parks and, little shops and restaurants and cafes nearby. It's going to depend on what city or what area you're in, what's going to be the things that people like to live near. But these are the things that make people want to live in a house or want to live in an apartment. And so the better those things are for a property, the better your investment is going to tend to be over the long run. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to match up, get the best numbers you can for the best qualitative parts of a neighborhood and a property. And if you can get both of those, then you've got the ingredients for a pretty good long-term investment. You can be more confident when you go to make an offer once you do find some leads on properties.
And I do agree the numbers, like, they are important, but I do like the qualitative part as well, where like those measures that aren't necessarily in the numbers, like the neighborhood, the school is another big one that people look at. I've heard some people like to see if there's a Whole Foods nearby the property to make investments there. So there are like a lot of different criteria, of course, for making your choice. But for someone who has not made a single investment yet, what is the best type of real estate investment for getting started? Like, is there one particular one that's the best for ultra beginners?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I feel pretty strongly about one particular strategy that I almost always recommend first to new investors, and it's something called house hacking. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or your listeners are familiar with it, but basically this means it's kind of like a hybrid between a rental property and just buying a property that you're going to live in. And so what I mean by that is, instead of just buying like a regular old house or a big house and just you living in the house by yourself, why not buy a duplex, a triplex, a quadruplex, or even a house that you could rent out spare bedrooms? Like if you're are going to be living on your own anyway. I have friends in their, 18, 20, 25 years old who are all the way up to in their 30s. They just rent out bedrooms on Airbnb or something. And the point is to, however you do that, to generate some extra income from your residence instead of just buying a house to live in a house or just renting a house. And so the numbers are really cool on that. I'll give you an example. Like when I first started investing, my first kind of long-term hold rental property was a fixer-upper kind of bank-owned foreclosure quadruplex, meaning it has 4 units, so 4 front doors, but it's all under one roof. And so I bought the property, got it fixed up, and I lived in unit number 2, and then I rented out unit number 1, 3, and 4. And at this time, the rents have increased a lot in the last 13 years since I did this, but I had $400 per month in rent. So $1,200 coming in from my other 3 units. And my total mortgage payment, principal, interest, my taxes, my insurance was under $1,100 per month. And so I had $1,200 coming in, under $1,100 going out for my core expenses. So I was basically, living for free outside of just having to pay for some maintenance and things like that. And instead, I did that with a very small down payment, because when you live in a house, there are lots of cool loan programs with lower down payments with pretty good interest rates. And so that was how I got started, was just by getting a smaller down payment, living in a house or living in a property, generating income. And there's so many creative ways to do that. You can, like I mentioned earlier, you can live in a house, rent out bedrooms. You can buy a house that has a basement apartment or maybe a garage apartment. You can, I know people who live in college towns and they rent out their house during like sporting events and things like that and make extra money. And so the point is, you don't need to just like blindly go into a house and pay a full mortgage payment. There are ways to kind of turn that into a little side hustle, and you make money, and you also learn a ton about the real estate business, so that you then have more confidence to go buy some more properties later on if that's what you wanted to do.
And like house hacking is a really good one. I have heard that before, and I think a lot of us have also heard of Airbnb. Like just due to like the nature of how successful it's been, but I don't feel like we've conquered that idea yet where we'll just welcome a stranger into our homes. I don't feel like a lot of people have done that yet. So with the Airbnb part, how can we make sure that the right people are coming into our homes?
Yeah, I'm not a real big Airbnb expert, so a lot of it's just been me, like friends and people I've talked to, and I've actually been an Airbnb, user a pretty good bit as well. But yeah, I think there's some safeguards, and Airbnb is like, they obviously have it in their best interest. If they had crazy people coming in and staying in people's houses and not being good guests, that would be pretty bad for their business. So I'm pretty sure there's some ways they can kind of do some screening, but. The other thing is, if you're not comfortable with that part of it, I mean, there are also ways to get like long-term roommates. Like I have a friend in Washington, D.C., which is a really high price market. And his deal was he bought a 4-bedroom house, and he was a year out of college, I think, and so he just went to some of his friends who were young professionals and said, hey, where are you going to be living? And they're like, well, I think we've got some one studio apartments that are going to be, $1,100 a month or $1,000 a month. And he was like, well, why don't you just rent one of my bedrooms for $500? Rent for be half the cost. And, we already know each other. And so like he went the route of just going with people he already knew, or, trying to like screen them ahead of time. And it's a little bit easier to do that with like a long-term tenant. Airbnb, I'll have to kind of punt on that one. I'm just not as familiar with how people are screening them and making sure they're comfortable with the extra bedrooms.
Thank you for giving us some insights on Airbnb. And I do appreciate the honesty. And it's also great, like the insights you did give, because Airbnb is definitely something that is emerging. I feel like a lot of people have heard of it already. Some people have given it a try. I haven't given Airbnb a try yet, but I know you have, and I'm sure a lot of people have as well.
Yeah, and I've used it all over the world too. Like we went to Ecuador, and that was the first place we stayed in was Airbnb. And I think it's kind of like, if anybody stayed in like a bed and breakfast, it's kind of an old school kind of thing, but you get to know the person ahead of time. You're kind of emailing people back and forth and getting to know the owner. And it's like, so you kind of can tell, it's like you're inviting a guest into your house. And I mean, to me, like that's one of the best innovations of the internet has been the ability to use spare spaces, like whether it's your car, like doing Uber, or whether it's your house on Airbnb, or there's some like tool sharing websites. Like, I don't keep a lot of tools in my house because I just never use them, but you can go have a tool sharing app on your on your phone. I mean, there's so many cool ways to kind of connect untapped resources that were just sitting there, not making any money for people, that are now available. And there's certainly some hurdles to get over psychologically with your home, because that's like your sacred space. That's your home, that's your safe place. So it's not for everybody, for sure. But I know a lot of people who do it like they have a basement apartment or a place that's kind of outside of their home. That can be a lot simpler, maybe a good way to start.
And one of the questions that I also want to ask, because like I'm just taking in all this insight about real estate right now, that is something that I definitely want to pursue in the future, not just to buy my own property, but to expand in it.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about it. It's just a matter of me jumping in, probably through a house hack first, and then like expanding later on. But what is something that you believe holds most people back from becoming successful real estate investors, other than not jumping in?
Yeah, I think the money is intimidating for people, and I can see that. Like, typically the objections I get when I'm first like talking to somebody, they're let's three things. Like, one is I just can't find the deals, which we talked about earlier, and that's something you just have to practice and learn some different strategies. The second would be like some of the maintenance and kind of work we started off with today. Like, hey, I just don't know that I want to handle tenants and toilets and things like that. And then the third one is getting the money for the property, because especially like what part of the country are you in, Mark? I'm kind of trying to get the image of like what different price ranges are, because every market's a little bit different.
I'm in New York.
New York. So like big cities, East Coast, West Coast, like the prices are just crazy, right? I mean, it's just compared to somebody's salary, even if you're making good 6-figure salaries, you're talking about $1 million properties sometimes and $800,000 properties. And so I think like that hurdle of saying I've got to go out and borrow or save up a big down payment is a big hurdle for people in bigger cities, and even in smaller cities. Like I'm in the southern U.S. where prices are a little bit more reasonable. You still saving up 20% down or 10% down can be like $10,000, $20,000, $40,000. So that part of that is like just not sexy. You just have to like figure out a way to make some money over here and save some money, set it aside, and just do it. There's no like tricks or secrets on doing that. I wish there were. But there are ways. Like I started, like when I first got into real estate, I had $1,000. And so there are ways, if you're willing to like contribute some time and entrepreneurial ability, you can use your creativity to do some deals. And like, let me give you one example. Like if I were in a big city, like I would focus on a creative strategy like this. I would try to meet property owners, maybe perhaps like a landlord, like an older landlord who's been in the business for a while. And I might not even start with trying to buy their property, because that might be like the price might be too high. It might just be difficult to do that. I would actually talk to them about leasing their property, but negotiating a ability to sublease it to somebody else. And what I mean by that is, let's say like Mark, you're the owner of this property and you'll lease it to me for $2,000 a month, and it's a two bedroom apartment. And so then I would go out, and going back to our kind of house hacking conversation earlier, like if I could find a roommate who would rent from me for, I don't know, $1,200 a month or something, I could use the income from my roommate and I could live in a $2,000 rental for a lot less. I could live in it for $800 a month. And so that's just one example. That's called a master lease. And in high price markets where financing and kind of saving up your down payment's an issue, you can use more creative strategies by basically leveraging the owner of the property and their equity and negotiating with them instead of having to go to the bank and trying to come up with a bunch of money. And I did a lot of that early on, whether it was with sellers, doing leasing like that, or seller financing, or I would go out to, like I had a professor at my college that I kind of stayed in touch with, and he would loan me money or partner with me on some deals because I didn't have enough cash to do it. And so the point is, like, if you have some hustle and some energy and you're out there finding deals, you can go find ways to leverage other people who do have money and kind of find a way to share the profits together.
I really like that idea of how you mentioned you and your college professor teaming up, because one of the things that I've heard about real estate is that like, there are some people who they won't buy a property by themselves. They'll buy it with multiple people. So if you have a down payment of like, let's say $10,000 that you have to make, but you have 3 other people with you, you get that same property for just $2,500. So if you're able to do it with people, like the profits are smaller, obviously, because it has to be split 4 ways, but the payments are also split 4 ways. So that's also an easier way to get started.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's managing that partnership and making sure those are people you trust and that you're who are also competent. That's a key. But assuming that's the case, yeah, you don't have to have all the money yourself. You can partner with other people. And there's also kind of shifting a little bit, but it's the same concept of splitting up a property and buying a piece of it. There's some pretty cool websites that I'm exploring a little bit that I still have some questions about. I'm trying to learn more about, but where it's called real estate crowdfunding, where you can actually make a loan sometimes for as little as like $1,000 or invest, $500,000 into and own a piece of a bigger commercial property or a bigger loan to an investor. And so it's all internet based, and there's some hurdles to get over. Like there's some accreditation hurdles on a lot of the platforms where you have to show that you have a certain net worth of usually like $1 million. So it's kind of a pretty high hurdle to get into some of them, but there's also some other ones that don't. There's a few of them that you don't have to be accredited. And so that's another way that if you're just trying to get your feet wet, like I've invested like $10,000 in a few different platforms each just to kind of see how they work, test it out, make sure I'm comfortable. But the good thing about that is I'm learning. If I were a brand new investor, I could learn about how the process works. I can observe things. I could ask questions. I could, all that data is there. And then maybe I start that way to learn a little bit, and then I go and then invest in my own property after I've learned some.
Oh, that's a really interesting website. I mean, that'll definitely be in the show notes for anyone who wants to explore that more. But Chad, I know that we all face certain challenges in real estate, but also life in general. And I feel like when people talk about their challenges, it helps people who are at that ultra beginner point that I mentioned before. So I'm wondering if you could share with us one big challenge you faced on your real estate journey and a powerful lesson you learned during that challenge.
Yeah, so probably the one that comes to mind for me was I got started in 2003. So I was like a brand new rookie real estate investor in 2003. And I started growing and growing with my business partner. And so we were just kind of hitting our stride, and we bought a lot of properties in 2007. So for everybody, do a little mini history lesson. 2007, 2008, 2009, the real estate market tanked around the country, kind of precipitated like a worldwide global meltdown. And it was all about real estate that kind of caused that. And so we basically grew like at exactly the wrong time and just didn't time it well, which I think anybody has a hard time predicting changes, but we certainly didn't. We were prepared for it a little bit, but we didn't see everything coming. And so we basically just had to kind of hang on, and make things work. We had the good thing was, as we were buying and selling a lot of properties, we made, I'd say 75-80% of the deals we did leading up to the downturn were really good properties. Like we would flip a house. One or two times we made $60,000, $80,000 on a flip. Right? So, we put $60,000 or $80,000 in the bank after one property. Those were good, right? And we had other properties that were really good rental properties that had good cash flow and a good location. But the problem wasn't those 80%. It was like the 10 to 20% of the deals that we either bought in a bad location. We kind of underestimated how, that qualitative stuff I was talking about earlier. Or we underestimated how many repairs we were going to have to do up front, or we had some negative cash flow on a rental property. And so we had to sort of just deal with those properties during a downturn when you couldn't really sell them. You couldn't get rid of them anymore. And so we had saved the lesson kind of for all that was that was kind of a bad thing, but we learned that we did some good things too. Like we saved a lot of our cash when we were going into that downturn. We still lived very simply, frugally. And so we had a lot of cash reserves going into that, and we actually needed them. We actually had negative cash flow. We had to feed properties for a while. And so for 3 to 5 years for sure, it wasn't a lot of good positive cash flow. It was just, hey, we're just having to hang on here. And we had to eat into our reserves. And we also just had to be very creative, like I was mentioning earlier, and hustle and make things work and talk to people and, talk to our tenants, talk to private lenders. And so we got through it. We didn't have, we never missed a payment. We never had any those kind of issues. And we kind of got through on the other side, and we're actually able to buy a lot of properties during the downturn because there were so many opportunities in 2008 and 9. And so that was, a negative and a positive. I think we felt like we learned that how important it was to have cash reserves in real estate. That's one of my biggest messages I would want to convey to anybody. This is not a no money down kind of thing. Even if you didn't put any money down on the down payment, you need to set aside some cash, just like you would in your personal life, just in case things go wrong. Because in real estate, you buy these buildings and, a roof could leak. You could have a heating and air unit go out. And those aren't like $500 bills. Those are, when a roof goes out or heating and air goes out on a big property, that's, thousands of bucks. And so you need to have some staying power if you're going to want to go through those ups and downs, which always come in real estate.
And you mentioned that living a frugal lifestyle, and that helped you to have some reserves for when things didn't go very well. And I'm wondering if you could give us some quick pointers on how to live that frugal lifestyle, because I know it's not it's not a cheap lifestyle. I know there's a difference between the two, but I'm wondering if you could share with us some pointers.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's like some of the stuff we talked about, house hacking is, your housing bill is about a third on average of your, or a third or more of your total expenses. So if you can just hack your housing and not have a big housing payment, like that alone will be really big. Other things like, cars are another one. I'm not big on having personal debt. I definitely use leverage and debt in real estate, and so I don't have a problem with it conceptually. But I just think if you get in the habit of only buying stuff when you have the money to buy it personally, you're not going to get yourself like over leveraged to the point where you're having to use future earnings, which may or may not be there. That's what the problem is with the recession, is that you're all of a sudden your earnings have shrunk. But if you have debt and you have a lot of personal expenses going out, then your expenses stay high and your income goes down. That's a problem. And so that's just sort of kind of seems like common sense, but that's where most people get in trouble in the recessions, is having a lot of, stuff, usually houses and cars, on borrowed money. And so I think just paying off your debts, being kind of disciplined, being conservative with that kind of thing, I think is really important. And then the other thing is just figure out ways to have a fun lifestyle, doing stuff that doesn't cost that much money. And so for me, a lot of the things I liked were playing basketball in the middle of the day. I like playing pickup basketball. I like exercising. My wife and I, we met, we like to play ultimate frisbee and hike. And so those things are awesome. We love doing those, but how much money does it cost to hang out with your friends and play ultimate frisbee, or to play basketball or something, or take a hike, in the park? That kind of stuff is really good for you. It's good exercise, good for your health. It doesn't cost much money. And so I think sometimes at least I'm speaking for myself, I tend to get caught up in what other people are doing and spending a bunch of money, and that's how you have to be happy. And part of my whole mission with money is, yes, go buy real estate, spend money in your real estate, but also kind of figure out what it is that makes you happy and the kind of things you want to do in your life. And if it makes you happy to spend the money, spend the money. But there's a lot of stuff we spend money on that's just sort of keeping up with our friends, and we're not really conscious of it. And so those are the kind of things, if you can figure out ways to cut that out and replace that with other things that are fun and good for you, that just makes the whole deal a lot easier.
I really like those insights about the frugal lifestyle. And I this is something that I don't really think about as much because I'm 20, I don't have a property yet, where I feel like it's different for people who do have, let's say the neighbor levels up, buys a new car. I'm not going to buy a new car for myself, but other people may think like that. So right. From my standpoint, it's good to get these lessons early. And for anyone who is in that situation now, just be more conscious. And one of the things you could is just write down all the things you're spending your money on, and you'll learn a lot of things about how you spend your money.
Exactly. Yeah, just being conscious of it, aware of it. There's nobody outside telling you hey, that's the wrong thing to spend the money on. It's more about you being aware of it and just writing it down, like you said, and to say, you know what, I shouldn't be spending $500 on that. That's really not making me happy. Let me just get rid of that. That's kind of what I'm talking about.
I really do like that idea. And obviously, if you expand upon it, you can save a lot more money. And I feel like we get a lot of these insights just by continuing to learn, whether it's through podcasts and other means. And one of my favorite ways to learn is by reading books. And with that in mind, Chad, I'm wondering if you could share with us 3 great books that you believe will have a positive impact on us.
Yeah, I've noticed you read a lot of books and do book reviews. I'm kind of a bookworm myself. I love it. So one of the books I'll throw out there is an old school book, but it was the first one I read when I got out of school and I started getting my real world education. It was a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And it's sold millions of copies, but it's a really cool book. Whatever field you're in, real estate, whatever. It's not a real estate book. It's more about personal communication, both with so communication with yourself and communication with other people. And so the first 3 habits are things. I think the first one is be proactive, and it's about things happen to you in life, and are you reacting and just kind of blindly, or are you actually reacting in a way that's kind of aligns with who you are and who you want to be. So it's just kind of that kind of consciousness. But then other habits are about like, I think the fourth habit is think win-win when you're communicating with other people. It's like any business relationship, any other relationship, making sure it like works for both of you. And so it's like some really like kind of nice kind of fundamental basic stuff, but they really apply well to your personal relationships, to your life. So I think a lot of people would benefit from that one. So you asked for 3, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let me throw a couple real estate books out there too, since we were talking about that. There's one called Building Wealth One House at a Time. And that's by a guy named John Schaub. And he's been investing for like 40, 50 years down in Sarasota, Florida. And it's a real, like, it's kind of like the fundamentals. I used to play football, and so in sports. So I'm always talking about like the fundamentals, because sometimes we get so wrapped up in the, like the specific tactics and the latest thing. Whereas really, like, whether it's life or real estate, like, there's just the fundamentals are what you really need to know. And so that's a book about the fundamentals of buying rental property. And his main message is like, just buy one house at a time. Like if you just bought one house a year for the next 5 years or 10 years, you could retire early. You could do a ton of good stuff. You don't have to be like big and huge and go crazy with this stuff. You can have a very simple portfolio and just do it and just be kind of deliberate about it and do some really awesome things financially. So that's that one. The other one I would recommend is for, like, you asked about deal analysis earlier. And there's a book, has a really long title, so I got to remember the title of this. Everything you need to know about cash flow. And let me look it up on Amazon real quick, just to make sure I got that. But yeah, it's a book. It's basically like kind of like a reference book you'd have on your shelf. Like if you're saying, all right, what's that formula, that cap rate formula, and what's this one? It has all the formulas in there. It talks about the numbers, and so it's just a really good way to have, like, if you're going to be in real estate, I think it's like one of those like 3 or 4 books you have to have on your shelf, just so you know what the numbers are, that key thing that makes you confident when you're buying a property. Let's see. Need to know about cash flow. See if Google works with me here.
Those long book titles can be really annoying sometimes.
Yeah, somehow some of these do pretty well, which is amazing. Like, I'm actually writing a book this year, and the title, let's keep this thing concise. And you've written a lot of books, and here this guy's, it's like a bestseller, many, many years. And let's see, I obviously didn't write it right. I'll definitely give it to you so you can have it in the show notes, Mark, and that way everybody can check it out afterwards.
And that book and the others, they will all be in the show notes, markgilberti.com/E179. And if you guys want a book on how you can create, promote, and optimize your content for growth and revenue, you can get my book, Content Marketing Secrets, over at markgilberti.com/book. And before we wrap up this episode, Chad, I've asked you several questions throughout our time together, but what do you believe is one question we need to be asking ourselves more often?
Yeah, I'm going to go back, like, just a super practical question. Like, what's the most productive thing I could be doing right now? I like those, like, kind of like current, like present moment questions. Like, all right, I've got an hour here. Like, most of us have kind of thought about our goals. We've thought about the big picture a little bit. Like, but just ask us, like, what is the thing I can be doing right now that will be productive and move me towards my goals that I have this year? And usually, like, if you ask yourself that kind of question, like, your mind will say, hey, yeah, you need to be, like, looking for go out and drive around and look for properties. That's what your number one thing is. Or go look on Zillow and search those properties. And so, like, I like those kind of habitual questions that then kind of lead us to taking action and getting in motion.
Chad, thank you for sharing that great question with all of us and for sharing all of your great insights throughout our time together. And if you guys want to learn more about Chad, he has a free real estate investors toolkit. So if you've liked all of the amazing insights Chad has already offered, just think about how great that real estate investors toolkit is going to be. And that is over at coachcarson.com/newsletter if you want that free real estate investors toolkit. Chad, I can't thank you enough for sharing all of your great insights with us. It was such a pleasure to have you on Breakthrough Success.
The pleasure is all mine, Mark. It's been a lot of fun, and thanks for having me on.
How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn more and get access to this free resource, visit markberty.com/